Hey, Grexies. Hey teachers, welcome back to the channel. I'm Haley here at Teacher's Pet. I am a full-time assistant teaching professor at an R2 university for course load, and in this video series we go through and set up our planners, bullet journals, calendars, whatever you use to keep track of your life together, while I tell you a story about something that happened to me in class, teaching life, campus life, and all that good stuff. And this week's story is all about those dreaded course evaluations, but I went very, very untraditional, especially for a general education class made up mostly of, engineering and computer science students. So that was a big risk in the grading structure. I tested a lot of brand new projects this semester. I built a lot of brand new rubrics with the help of my Teacher's Pet app. So that was, a risk, just having a lot of brand new things I was sort of testing. And I also wrote my own, teaching pack, like my own open education resource OER textbook. And so that was also a risk, just, using something that was, completely for me and not sort of one of the published books. So there was a lot of risk, but overall I did feel like it went well, but I was still, of course, nervous to see how the students felt. And yeah, so I'm going to tell you that story. So go ahead and grab your planner, bullet journal, start, preparing for next week, the week ahead. We'll hop into mine, and while we're just doing that work together and setting up and decorating our calendars and journals, I'm going to tell you about my course evaluations. Alright, so with the course evaluations, first I had one of the highest rates of participation this semester, which also, kind of made me nervous because it's the most, actual closest to being truly like valid, reliable data. In the past, the course evals, I would often get like 30% right response rate, which would basically come down to students who love your class, who love my class, and students who didn't like it, were the two groups in that 30% that would fill it out. And, just that is really too low of kind of a sample rate to really have strong meaning. But this semester, I actually got all the way up to 62%, so I was able to double it, and now I can really feel like this is becoming a better, more true representation and snapshot of how the class went and how students are feeling. Of course, 62% is still low, but like for course evaluations, pretty good for my institution and just observations from the past. And the way that I got to that and essentially doubled my response rate was my institution, in our dashboard, we do get, an overall response rate as the course evals are open. And so my deal with them was basically, if as a class you get to 75% response rate, I'll give every single person basically this extra credit. And if we don't get there, nobody gets it. Now, obviously, we didn't necessarily get to 75% in all of my sections, but we did get close. And so I did end up giving everybody that extra point because the response was so strong. I think across the sections, it peaked at like 78% in one. One did only have about 50% response rate, but, I adjusted for, the students on the roster who weren't really participating anyway, kind of like removing them and focused more on the, active all the way until the end students. So anyway, just dangling that carrot saying, hey, as a group, if you get to this marker, we're going to have extra credit. Elicited obviously a much higher response rate, and I was really happy to kind of give that away. And so overall, yes, I am extremely happy. My instructor score, so my institution does it, is a 1 to 7 scale, 7 being the highest or like strongly agree, 1 being lowest, strongly disagree on any particular metric. We have like 12 questions. Half of them are about the class. The other, not quite half, are about the instructor. So in terms of my instructor score, which I genuinely care about a lot more since it's, more about what I as a person am doing. I was way above my department mean, way above the college mean, way above the university mean at a 6.32. So that fills me with a lot of excitement and pride, of course. I always brought, you know, concepts from class IRL at the beginning of every section, where I really could show them stories from my, real life outside of class of how the concepts that we were learning. And I was, make sure to connect it then as kind of the introduction to the week or a review of like the past week, how they connected. And I think that definitely contributed to that high score because, some of my highest individual metrics were that I demonstrated interest in their learning. I demonstrated, respect and professional treatment for them. I encouraged their interest in the class materials and in the, qualitative written comments. A lot of the students, a big theme was, I love that you brought in real examples from your life, from your past work, your jobs. You like went and found very clear applications and explained it to us, which let them get to know me as a person, while also, showing like, here's why these concepts matter and here's how it, showed up in our textbook and how, kind of transforms when we're talking about sort of the professional world or real, quote unquote, real life. And so, yeah, I definitely think that is the number one contributing factor, besides, as hopefully all of us as educators do, I do care about my students and I do want them to learn. And I just make sure to show that. And I do, convey like emotion to them, which I think just builds more authenticity and trust, work with them. So that I'm absolutely thrilled about, so happy, and obviously very proud to be well above the mean scores for kind of the rest of my institution. Now my core scores were a little bit lower than the mean for my department in my college, but they were higher than the university average. So, it's just kind of like, yeah, it was fine. I had a 5.97. So just shy. I definitely have goals for myself to achieve over a 6 every semester. So I did fall a little bit short, but again, with all of the risks that I took this semester and how ungraded and non-traditionally structured the class was, with students who are very, very used to heavily structured, curriculum being in sort of math, engineering, computer science. I'm definitely happy with that. I think it's fine. And kind of within that, though, is also like, so workload, right, is a question that they ask, which I hate. Also, there's question 6 about interest in class, which I hate because I do teach a required second year writing course. And so obviously those scores are always incredibly low. And even when thinking about, my department, like, yeah, I was lower than my department's mean score, but that's also taking all of our own major classes that obviously are probably scoring high on that interest area, whereas the gen ed class always scores extremely low because nobody is at the offset interested in their, technical professional writing class. And so also with it being a writing based class, the workload is inherently feels heavy, even though I don't think I assign that much. But just being a writing and a class project, like it takes as long as it takes, right, to create these different things. And so, I feel like there's not tons I can do there. And then the other thing that brought it down is like about my class organization. And I had a couple like very, very low scores there, which is interesting, except 70% of the respondents either said agree or strongly agree. So when it comes, right, obviously to that mean, it's like, okay, well, my score was lower because I had some 1s and 2s, obviously dragging things down a bit, even though way more people said like agree to strongly agree. So, just making sure to remember that averages don't necessarily tell the full story. And most people thought that it was organized very clearly and well. And, I'll show you again in the future weeks my course overview, but basically my homepage is literally a linked weekly checklist. Here's everything due this week. So if they just, looked at the homepage, they could follow along that way. There's also kind of a table schedule right there on the homepage that they could follow along. I also organized it in modules for them. So, the people that are like, I'm confused about what to do. I'm confused about why they are confused a little bit. But I'm going to continue revising and thinking about how I could maybe design or set it up, or, what I could do to continue to help them. But just keeping in mind that most people were like, yeah, I knew what I needed to do each week and it was fine. So those are just some of the like kind of interesting course related scores. I also had a little bit of a lower score on the like materials for the class being useful, but again, it's just very interesting because I like I said, I wrote my own book, and again, in the qualitative comments, that was a huge highlight of things that people said, this is so helpful, please, finish, because I didn't finish it. There's a few chapters that then I needed to pull more traditional, books and materials from. But pretty much every week, right, they had a mini lecture video that was me that I produced explaining these concepts in more of a like applied sense. And then the textbook, which I also turned into an audio book, a podcast basically that they could listen to. And yeah, and so it's like, a real bummer that they didn't feel like it connected. But again, the breakdown, there's a couple people who were like, hated it. Most people said agree to strongly agree. And then the written comments were like, that was the best part. So, just brings up questions of like, I mean, you can't please everyone. And maybe they didn't actually watch or read or use the materials, the folks that didn't feel as useful. I don't know, who knows? Or maybe they were thinking not necessarily about the books, but some other piece of material, maybe the examples that I pulled, maybe they were focused more on how I set up the projects. Just hard to know when they didn't leave comments, because in the written comments, none of the stuff that was written gave me insight or explained what they didn't find useful in the materials. Like there was just there were no comments saying that thing was unhelpful. All the comments talked about how all the materials were helpful. So I think it's just really hard to know for the people that, mark you low, but then don't explain. And that's just kind of how course evals go. So yeah, overall though, really, really good. Some of the other high points for like the instructor or for the course that I was really excited about was that my assignments were clearly related to the materials. I did spend a lot of time really focusing in from my ungrading group and professional development and perspective of being like, let me lock in my student learning outcomes for the class, for every unit, for every project. And then I built the assignments based on the learning outcomes, which is a process we should do, but also we know, sometimes we get a little lax with that, and the outcomes kind of become as an afterthought. But I really was like, no, I'm starting with the outcomes and trying to think of all the different ways and projects and avenues students could show me those skills. And I definitely think that paid off, because the assignments being clearly related, their ability to learn the concepts, combined with like being treated like professionals, were all some of the highest marks that I received, and I definitely would point back to that. So if you are in the midst of maybe redesigning your courses or thinking about it, or maybe you scored a little lower than you hoped on those metrics, I just say like, start with your outcomes. Like, get all of your past assignments and ideas of how you teach just out of your head for a second, go back to your learning outcomes, and then try to rebuild from there, because that's definitely, I think, the thing that helped me out the most. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting, so when I looked back over past data, my highest scores for both course and instructor were from last spring, 2024. And some of the things that I did there, and I can definitely understand why. So in that class, I actually it was still ungraded, but it was out of 100%. So the assignments were all, required in that kind of traditional way, whereas this semester, they had a lot of choice. They were actually expected to be like, only do basically one or two out of all the project options in each group, which a few students didn't know was like challenging for them. But in that, where I scored the highest, everything was required because it was graded out of 100%. But then within the projects, they either got full credit, half credit with kind of the assumption slash requirement that they revise to get full credit, or 0 credit because they didn't turn it in. And I did like that, and grading it was solid. I liked the outcomes, and obviously they liked, having that more direct blend of a traditional with some ungrading elements. And so I might consider like how I could go back to something like that. But there's also a few things that are lacking from that system that I really like about my system this semester. So some of the things that I really liked about my system this semester that again led to a little bit lower scores, but I think you don't have to take into consideration the trade-off between them. So this semester, right, I kind of built it also from this learning outcome around systems thinking, which is, one of the top sort of, soft core skills, soft skills that employers, across kind of the world are talking about. I got it from the World Economic Forum survey, had systems thinking up there with analytical thinking, problem solving, like all of that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to approach this class structure and semester with how can I actively force them or engage them in more of this systems thinking and agency and taking ownership and actually, making decisions because there are true choices for them to pursue. And that is scary and that is challenging, of course. And so I can understand why the scores were a little bit lower because I am making them kind of think a little bit harder than when it's just here's a list of assignments and you do all of them. You just do what's in front of you. And so even though the score is a little bit lower, I really value and like that they were forced to do something a little bit harder by engaging in, okay, if I choose this small assignment, how does that play into my final grade, goals and calculations? And if I want to do, I want to go into this type of field, and so which of these project options would be best suited for that? I think are all important, and forcing them to have more agency, I think is really good. And with the qualitative comments, there were several comments actually speaking to that said, at first understanding the class structure was hard. I kind of wish it was traditional because that's easier, but I actually had to make choices, and that was a new experience, and I think that was good. Or, they talked about kind of the problem solving element. And so there definitely were reflections on that of like, wow, having to make these choices was more engaging in the long run, even though I was more frustrated kind of in the middle of it. So I'm definitely going to think about ways that I can streamline it a little bit better to make the choices, I think, easier, like more clear for them. One comment was like, oh, I'd like that you had all these projects, but it was hard to know which project was actually best aligned with my degree. Now, I did in my course onboarding first module have an entire list of like, if you're this major, you might want to do these projects, but adding that in more along the way, because of course saying it once at the very beginning, of course, like I shouldn't have expected people to go back or have necessarily notes on that. I mean, low key, I was like, you probably should have written that down right in your course plan and planner, and again have that agency. But I definitely understand and know, right, they need to have it repeated in a much more visible, kind of easy to find way. So I'm going to think about how to do that, maybe adjust the way the choice and the grading and all of that is set up, maybe try to find a way to get back to out of 100%, 100 points, but then, using a lot more of like the drop score functions are all some ideas that I have. And so what I'm actually going to be doing, I'm very excited. So for June, basically, so kind of starting next week through all of June, we're going to start a series where I go through this Gen Ed course tour and really break down okay, kind of week by week, we'll start with the course overview and grading structure. Then we'll go through how I set up my reading assignments, how I set up my different project groups, how we did weekly participation, kind of through all the elements of the class, and do kind of a deep dive retrospective of how ungrading, how my workflow process, the tools that I used, all led to kind of these outcomes and returning to these course evals and some of the qualitative comments. So I'm excited to like do that deep dive, especially as I think about, what I do want to change. So I'll teach it again in the fall semester. And so that will also be me making these adjustments to then rebuild the class for the next semester. So I hope that you join me with that every week when we go through. Okay, so in terms of as I'm wrapping up and the decoration on my planner is basically done, I said I don't have a lot since I am in the summer and it's kind of now just transitioning to more getting things ready and course prep for the fall kind of stuff at a very leisurely pace. I'm not teaching any summer classes. I turned down a summer teaching contract because I honestly was just feeling a little burnt out from so heavily redoing my classes in the past year and just frankly didn't want to, and I wanted to focus more on like teacher's pet kind of stuff. So my planner is like more vibey and decorative than necessarily functional because I just don't have as much to keep track of anymore. But I went with this, very desert kind of inspired. I just really, really loved the like pink orange sunset kind of idea here from this new kind of sticker pack from Archer and Olive that I got in my monthly kit. In terms of the week, right, it is May 26th to June 1st for me. Typically, I was starting on Sundays throughout the semester, but now that we're in the summer mode, actually, I'm going to test out and see if I like having it start on Monday, what I want to do with that, just kind of switching it up a little bit. So we are doing Monday the 26th through Sunday, June 1st instead. The only major thing I need to really do is, start prepping for I was accepted to a conference about grading and ungrading where I'll be presenting how the teacher's pet tools helped me set up my ungrading and talking about, and kind of comparing student learning outcomes, different, grades and course eval scores from my traditional graded classroom into now my ungraded kind of setup. So that conference isn't until the middle of June, but next week you might as well get really started on that poster and doing a interactive poster session. Otherwise, I want to build my front planter boxes and just spend, this time where I'm not doing all the teaching stuff and I'm starting to get off contract to set up my house. I need to follow up with my department chair to talk about my course evals and performance review. And then I am working with the Office of the Provost this summer. They extended my fellowship. So I need to start planning the website audit and how I'm going to accomplish those goals over the summer. Now my playlist is called Backyard Happy Hour Vibes. It just makes me feel like, right, having a little, like rosé, a little cocktail or mocktail on my backyard, kind of, looking out in that nice late afternoon, kind of when it started to cool off, the sun is great, and that's just kind of the vibes that it feels like. And so it is a lot of kind of light, sort of like poppy, electronic, just vibey music, and you can grab that playlist in the YouTube description if you want to vibe out as well. And I definitely felt like this whole kind of color scheme and vibe, like truly my decorations look like how that playlist feels to me. Just the sun setting on a good semester, kind of the sunrise of the summer and the potential of the summer and what I'm going to do in my classes in the fall and like just the potential of change. I love all of that. It just fills me with a really like great, calm, but also excited feeling. And then the quote and sort of song, and the song is on that playlist, is stumbling through paths up in the sky, cinnamon stars in our eyes, nothing gets me higher than to be with you. And I think that's a very poetic quote. I don't, just like don't think about it too hard, I guess. But yeah, it's just kind of like stumbling through like what am I gonna change? What am I gonna do? How am I gonna use all this data to do something different that's even better and higher and stronger, feels good. And then also, just looking forward to the summer and hanging out with my friends and my family and my, husband. And, honestly, I love the summertime because it's when I get to stop and really dream about what the fall will be like, dream about my next, academic year, dream about what I want to do differently. And I really love living in that period of transition and change. And so this whole just kind of like vibe and that quote just evokes for me the emotion and feeling of dreaming big, trying to achieve higher goals, and kind of like heart eyes emoji at the thought of redesigning my classes and using this data and spending my summer writing my textbook and recording new videos and just that creative process. So that's all kind of like my vibe. All right, and so our kind of special challenge prompt to really think about, as you probably have your course evals coming in as well, is going to be about that. I know that they are kind of scary, can be overwhelming. I know I get a lot of feelings when I first get that email, and as I kind of sit with them and settle in. But as we, kind of as I talked about, just remember the average doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, so don't, get too discouraged or, whatever about that. So I really want you to, sit with, fully unpack your course evals, go into, any sort of skill or specific section level. Don't get too caught up in like the average scores, and instead stop and I really just encourage and want us all to think, deeply and kind of hard about the distribution of your scores, what could be considered outliers, why maybe those outliers exist, do you need to worry about them? We all know there's always going to be people and students that just, they just don't vibe. They just don't get it. They maybe honestly didn't even pay attention. They possibly didn't ever show up to class. And that's why, right, they think you didn't communicate well. All of those happen. So if, you only have a couple of those, let's focus in on where the majority of your students, right, are clustered and go with a lot more of like the mode, right, the score that had the most amount of responses, instead of always like living in those kind of average spaces. So really sit with, unpack course evals, and look over the past few years, right? What are some of the bright spots, things that have been helpful over the past few years you should keep doing? What are some of the growth areas that you could and you want and maybe you should really revisit? Bright spots and growth areas came from Chip and Dan Heath's fantastic book, Switch. Love it. Highly recommend reading it. It's definitely has helped me with my course designs and thinking about, right, what is within my power to nudge and change, and just rethinking about feedback that way. So definitely check that out. And yeah, so the course evals, it's all just data, and we can move forward with data, make choices with that data, for how you want to grow and improve. Let me know in the comments, share a story from your week. If you got your course evals back, go ahead and give yourself some love, some praise, drop, some of those positive comments you receive from students, share maybe tips, ask questions, advice on how you're navigating that process, and then join me, of course, next week for our journal and story time sessions, as well as next week we'll be starting that course tour kind of video series, really breaking down what I did with ungrading and alternative systems and kind of the risks that I took and how they turned out. Hope to see you then. Share it with another educator, teacher, grad student who's maybe going through that same thing. And until then, I hope that you have a great class.